Hi, I'm Aditya Krishna, and this is the JDCIL Technology Law Podcast. With me, I have my co-host, Ms. Arya Puchisia. In today's show, we'll be talking to Mr. Raghav Mendiratha on the impact of the Intermediary Guidelines 2021 on significant social media intermediaries. In particular, we'll be focusing on the impact on small and medium-sized enterprises. Mr. Raghav is an advocate registered with the Bar Council of Delhi and is legal fellow at the Future of Free Speech Project. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir, today, and we really look forward to this discussion.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, in that regard, I think we can just get in and begin with it. We'd like to just start by asking a few cursory questions and
Yes.
start the discussion for our viewers. So, recently, Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, which is the Senior Director of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, has said that the aim of the guidelines has been to increase accountability. And we just wanted to get your opinion and understand to what extent do you feel intermediaries should be accountable for the material published online by users?
So the IT Act is very clear on this. Section 79 of the IT Act says that intermediaries should not be liable for third-party content on their platforms. The rationale for this is that a platform such as Twitter or Facebook is essentially performing a public sphere function in a way that it is not putting out any information. It is not the originator of any information. It is merely the host that allows you and I, the platform, to have discussions online. So to the extent that platforms must be regulated, I see why the government is moving towards bringing in regulation for platforms. That said, we must understand that if responsibility is being ascribed to platforms in a way that it takes away their safe harbor protection, and it changes the current legislative framework and the current framework for their protection, for the protection of intermediaries, that is something that might affect our individual rights. So as much as it is a question of regulating big tech, it is also a question of our right to freedom of expression and our right to privacy.
I think that's quite apt in that sense. And just since we're getting on the concept of how things are changing in terms of the roles of such, intermediaries, I was just wondering how you would think that, for example, Twitter censorship of Trump or even Kangana Ranaut recently, or even Facebook's oversight board, what do you think they have a role in the way we perceive the role of intermediaries in protecting the rights on the internet? Do you think that their actions tend to change the dimensions of how we view it, as well as the regulatory framework that's going to come in following this?
Hmm. 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 So that's an interesting question because we're talking about private companies that are unelected, that do not owe any kind of democratic accountability to the people, now deciding whether a head of state should be censored or not. That amount of power with a private company is problematic.
Right. When you say that India has the court order procedure and the appropriate government has to give you the order to take down content, right? Don't you think that the intermediary guidelines actually kind of go back to the pre-Shreya Singhal era? Because now individual users have the right to say, okay, you know what? I'm complaining against this content that was posted on this particular platform, and now you're supposed to take it down. And I think that was one of the major issues why it actually went to the court in the first place. And also actually tying it to the research that was conducted by the Center for Internet and Society, where in 2011, under the erstwhile guidelines, that so if there is a comment, there's a comment section, and somebody reported one comment, the entire comment section was deleted. So that just amounted to over censorship. So don't you think we're actually kind of really just going back to that era?
Mm, I would say yes and no. We have diluted many of the protections that Shreya Singhal gave. Um, but would you say that the intermediary, whether the IT rules take you to pre-Shreya Singhal times? I wouldn't go to that extent. But I do definitely agree with you that the IT rules do dilute a very large chunk of the protection given to intermediaries by Shreya Singhal. So, Shreya Singhal interpreted actual knowledge in Section 79 very clearly, where it said that it must not, for example, let's bring in what's happening right now with the manipulated media tag, right? It was a letter, an alleged letter written by the Ministry of IT to Twitter, and again, there was a visit, quote unquote, visit by Delhi police officials to Twitter's office, but that is not the Shreya Singhal standard. The Shreya Singhal standard is very clear that actual knowledge, an intermediary can only be said to have actual knowledge when it is a government order or a court order. So to that extent, I feel it is the government bullying and throwing its weight around and diluting the protections to intermediaries through the IT rules. But I would not go to the extent of saying that Shreya Singhal is now completely nullified. I still feel that given that the rules are being challenged at the moment, and even if the rules were to stay, we would not entirely go back to pre-Shreya Singhal times.
I think that's really interesting, the point that you brought up there as well. And I think I'd have a slightly divergent view in some aspects, where I feel that the new laws that have come in have actually expanded the jurisprudence in terms of curtailment of freedom of speech. Now, not in the positive way, but in a negative way. And this is something I'm arguing as well in terms of these guidelines creating a heckler's veto. Where and for viewers, a heckler's veto is where you curtail speech to prevent a reactionary output by any other people in society. Now, if you look at the way the regulations are created as well, right? In India and under law as well, we have specific restrictions that are allowed on speech. And by allowing these grievances to be of any nature and having such a short period of time, it sort of creates a way where we're extending the jurisprudence in terms of curtailment of speech. And I feel that's quite problematic because the standard does change drastically in such a case. And I find that quite interesting to see the way that our jurisprudence is going to spread in terms of being more curtailing and going more towards, if you understand where I'm going with this. I just want to know your opinions in that regard, yeah.
I agree. I agree to the extent that, with the grievance redressal officers and also the 3-tier mechanism, for example, that digital news providers now have to comply with, you are opening yourself up to any and all users then writing to digital news organizations and then appealing, and saying that this must be taken down and then appealing that decision to the 2nd-tier mechanism and then finally taking it to the final and the 3rd tier. And what I find problematic is that even within that 3-tier regulatory mechanism, so to say, that grievance redressal mechanism, it is an executive body that decides what is permissible and what is not. So I do agree that it is a massive blow to free speech. I don't necessarily, so to that extent, I agree with you.
And another thing that you brought up, which I thought was interesting, was the fact about how nowadays, you were speaking about how section got removed because of people reporting it, right? And that's something similar I see happening in India's regulatory space as well in some regards, where I've termed it as grievance bombing, which is similar to review bombing, which is something that's done quite often on the Play Store as well in India. And I think that's something that's going to expand a lot more with these guidelines as well coming into place, because it's allowing multiple people without a specific, a standing to actually come in. And just before that, I think we'd spoken about, the aspect about private entities and the standard that we would, impose on them. And I think it'd be interesting to sort of, look at the classification of intermediaries, specifically these significant social media intermediaries at this point. And just wondering, do you think they're necessary? What are your views with regard to them? This classification, that is.
So the short answer to that is yes. I do feel there need to be different obligations for intermediaries based on certain characteristics, and identifying a user threshold, I feel, is a very reasonable basis for classifying intermediaries. Again, this is not something that has happened in India for the first time. If you look at, for example, the German NetzDG, they also have a user threshold requirement where any platform, any intermediary beyond 2 million users registered in Germany need to comply by certain different obligations. In India, the IT rules state that it is 5 million users. So I do feel it is a reasonable. I do feel that classifying intermediaries on the basis of the number of users they have is a reasonable way of distinguishing between intermediaries. The rationale there is very simple. If today I am starting a new social media platform, and my budget, for example, I have a small team of 50 content moderators. I have one chief under the IT rules. Let's say I have a chief compliance officer. Let's say I have a chief operating officer. I cannot be expected to have the same kind of obligations, the same kind of due diligence requirements as a Twitter or a Facebook with a multi-billion dollar revenue or a multi-billion dollar budget for some of these activities, right? So I do feel it's justifiable to have two different kinds of intermediaries. My problem is where the IT rules under Rule 6 say that the government, even if an intermediary does not meet this 5 million user threshold, the government can still order that even these intermediaries must comply with all obligations that significant social media intermediaries must comply with. So I feel that creates very arbitrary, that creates an opportunity for the government to use this power arbitrarily and abuse this power to a very large extent. So I feel that is where the problem lies. The distinction is very natural.
Um, and in this regard, with in respect of the reasonable classification we're creating. So from my understanding, this classification comes more from a metric of harm in terms of what is the possible harm that could ensue. And I was just wondering whether this 50 lakh or 5 million threshold, as you just said, would really make as much sense when it comes to different types of social media intermediaries. So the way I see it, various social media's platforms have different functions and the way they interact with the populace, and the metric of harm changes with the type of platform it is as well. So, and especially in light of the fact that they've also sort of created an overarching principle where everyone can come under it possibly, do you still feel that a reasonable threshold or a reasonable basis is created in this classification?
So let me take you back to Constitutional Law 1, right? If the rules are being challenged in the court today, the court is seeing if there is intelligible differentia between different kinds of platforms. To that extent, I feel that a classification based on the number of users does make sense. If you were to introduce other kinds of other bases on which platforms intermediaries could be classified, as long as you proposed a well-reasoned association or a well-reasoned basis for that classification, we could sort of engage in that argument more. We could sort of talk more about that. But I feel user threshold is one of the more objective techniques there is to classify intermediaries.
Certainly, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I think I just tied this to another concept in terms of how the court implicitly has used the Cosset judgment theorem, which is basically where they use multiple jurisdictions to actually prove that it's equally legitimate in a sense. And since you did point out that the Germans as well had a similar legislation in some regards, I think that could be used in the same way it was used in NALSA, to bring in a sort of a linkage to say that this law could also be justified and might have a reasonable classification in some regards. Just wondering your thoughts, and then after I think Arya can move on to her discussions regarding the guidelines specifically.
So again, the courts haven't really studied, given that the case is still sub judice, the courts haven't examined this aspect, and as we all know, the judgment isn't out yet. But yes, I agree that this would be something to look at.
Right. Thank you for your comments for the first section of the podcast, Raghav. Now we'll be moving on to the second section where we'll be analyzing specific provisions of the guidelines, right? So my first question would be in relation to the German legislation that you've already spoken about. And one of the critiques of that legislation was actually given by the special rapporteur of freedom of speech and expression, and was of the stringent timeline that was introduced under that legislation, right? And they said that this basically leads to chilling effect and over censorship and precautionary censorship, right? And these were a lot of words that they were invoked while they were critiquing that particular legislation. Now, my question is related to this in the context of the Intermediary Guidelines 2021. So they say that you have to take down content within 15 days or within 24 hours when it's related to sexually explicit images. Now, I do understand the rationale for creating that distinction, and it's completely reasonable. My concern comes from the point of view that there are over 50 crore users of WhatsApp, there are 44 crore users of Facebook, and there are 22 crores users of Instagram in India right now. And having one chief compliance officer or one grievance redressal officer puts a lot of burden. So do you think the stringent timeline that is given of 15 days, 24 days would really work out or pan out well given the demography of India?
So that's a very pertinent question, and let me break that into. There are two aspects to that question, right? So the first aspect is a removal timeline, which is 24 hours in the case of any content where a user says that a certain image of me has been uploaded, which depict, which grossly violates my privacy in a way that it is either a natural image or a morphed image that contains, that is highly graphic, that has, where my genitalia is visible, and to that extent, the rules mandate a removal timeline of 24 hours. To that extent, given that the rules limit the category, the class of content in which intermediaries must take down such content, given that it is limited to only images which are of a sexual nature, and given that this class of information is very, very small and is restricted, to that extent, I believe that there is a need for having a shorter removal time span for certain kinds of content. That said, this is a slippery slope to go down. Let me give you an example, right? So France last year passed a legislation called the Avia law, right? I wish I would I could speak French fluently, but since that is not the case, I'm not going to try pronouncing the name of the legislation. But the French Constitutional Council, which is, I wouldn't say equivalent of the Supreme Court, because the French Constitutional Council looks at legislation before it actually comes into force. But the Avia law also had similar provisions where they had multiple kinds of content categories, and two kinds were being examined by the Constitutional Council specifically. One of them was a 1 hour removal window for extremist terrorist content. And a second kind of removal window was for, again, clearly illegal content, again, which is similar to what we have in the Indian realm. And the French Constitutional Council held that this is violative of users' right to freedom of expression. The reason is very simple. When you have content, and Avia law also included removal of hate speech within 24 hours. So the French Constitutional Council said that when you're assessing sensitive questions such as what is hate speech or what is defamatory, questions which are not easy to determine. If you impose a short timeline of 24 hours on these social media intermediaries, again, these intermediaries are driven by profit, and given the massive amounts of content that is uploaded on these platforms every second, every minute, there is a strong possibility that if you impose these very short timelines on social media intermediaries, they will over-censor, right? And on the basis of that over-censorship, there will be a unreasonable restriction on your right to freedom of expression. So coming back to your question, given that the Indian rules only limit this to sexual content in this instance, I feel that personally is something that is needed, given the crimes against women, given that this is something, given that there is a history of very gruesome harm, there is a history of harm being caused to victims in this case. And also, if you look at the balance of harm principle, I feel in this case, for victims of non-consensually shared intimate images, the balance of harm lies in their favor. Where if, let's say, a 7-day time span was given to intermediaries, the harm that would be caused to victims would be much greater than the potential, the potential benefit of having this content up for 7 days. So given that this is restricted to sexual images, I think that this is needed. Now, coming to the constricted timeline of grievance redressal officers having to get back to users within 15 days, that has been contracted from 2011, and I completely agree with you on that front, that given the massive user bases that these platforms have, and just the massive amounts of content that is uploaded on these platforms every second, every minute, every hour, I feel that is a timeline that might be very unreasonable for platforms to comply with in the long run. WhatsApp has, and WhatsApp and other intermediaries have taken this to court, and I'm sure this is something that will come up. So on that end, I completely agree with you. And yeah.
You've already mentioned your opinions about Rule 6, so we won't delve into that question any further. I'd like to talk to you about a different provision under the IT, and that is Rule 7, that basically dismantles the safe harbor protection that these intermediaries have, right? And and there have been so many talks. So my question has two limbs to it. Number one, I would first like you to address the ban panic that like the country has been basically inflicted within the last 24 hours. So this is just for our listeners, because there are a lot of people who are not lawyers and do not understand the nuances of it. So it'd be great if you could just address the panic. And the second part of the question is that do you think that removing this protection that these intermediaries are provided with under the IT Act and all of that, it really has the potential to change the way we interact on the internet? Is it proportionate, honestly, to remove this protection, safe harbor that these intermediaries are given? Because safe harbor protection is really the cornerstone of online content regulation when we talk about it, right? So taking it away in itself poses a lot of issues in terms of speech and proportionality. And you could also talk about your article on the ICCPR obligations that India has. It would really tie well to this entire discussion.
Perfect. Okay. So Arya, that question has two parts, right? You first spoke about the ban on IT companies. Is that happening? Is that possible? And the second aspect was, can and should safe harbor protection be removed for intermediaries? So the first aspect of that is that I do not practically see Twitter and Facebook being banned in the country. The government does have the power, not under the IT rules, but under the blocking rules, to ban apps, to ban companies to ban intermediaries from functioning in the country. These are the rules that the government used to ban, for example, the 59 Chinese apps first, and then the additional apps. Is that happening? No. One, because I don't see a trigger for that at this point in time. Let's remember that the IT rules from yesterday, which is the 25th of May, the IT rules, significant social media intermediaries had to comply with the IT rules. And the significant social media intermediaries such as Twitter, such as Facebook, need to, for example, set up a complex grievance redressal mechanism, need to have a chief compliance officer who needs to be a resident of India, who will now be personally, criminally liable for any breach, right? But from what these intermediaries have said so far, they do intend on complying with these rules. So I don't see the trigger or the circumstances arising for these companies to be banned anytime in the given future. That said, from a very practical perspective, I also think that governments have invested massive amounts of money, and I mean both the BJP government and also other political parties. They've invested significant amounts of money in building troll armies and in building, significant presence on these social media platforms. So if these platforms are suddenly banned overnight, I feel not only does that bring immense bad press globally, it severs India-US relations, but it also leads to a very large loss of investment in these massive troll armies that have so far been generated. That said, can the government do it? Yes. Will the government do it at this point in time? I don't think so, for the reasons that we spoke about. Right? Again, and I'd love to hear both your opinions on this as well. But before that, I'm coming to the safe harbor protection aspect. Is there something you would like to pitch in with at this point?
Nothing specific. It's just the aspect that you pointed out is quite true, especially during the pandemic as well. The way social media has been not just being used by government entities, but the police as well, to either give information, to find out, if someone's in an area where a storm might happen, even to help people get access to various resources. Right. Apart from that, it also helps, quite ironically, stop fake news as well. So I think it's quite an integral part of society, and banning it is not a possibility that can happen, at least now. I don't see
Yeah,
it as a logical possibility at all. But
right.
yeah.
And in fact, Twitter and WhatsApp have been the last resort for distressed families who've been asking their communities for help, for medical supplies, for coordination at so many different levels. So I completely agree with you, sir. And on the second aspect of the safe harbor protection, you are absolutely right that safe harbor protection is the reason why we have modern internet the way it looks today, right? So we had Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act in the US. And it is a very simple provision. It is 13 words, and it essentially gives intermediaries safe harbor protection, which means that they will not be held liable for user generated content. So they will not be held liable for third party generated content. It is if one today, as per Indian law, that cannot be removed unless social media intermediaries do not act upon gaining actual knowledge, right? So again, with going back to Section 79 of the IT Act, so, intermediaries have safe harbor protections as long as they don't initiate communication. They don't. There are three conditions as per Section 79. Intermediaries are protected, and they do have a safe harbor protection if they do not initiate the transaction, select the receiver of the transaction, and select or modify the information contained in the transmission. And if an intermediary does not do any of this and it acts when it gets actual knowledge of an illegality, then it does have safe harbor protection, right? So the government today cannot whimsically take away safe harbor protection away from any intermediary as long as it abides by the legal framework within the IT Act and as per Shreya Singhal, right? And just the idea of taking away safe harbor protection would completely take away online speech as we know it. It would completely change the framework, the architecture of the entire internet, and one that is not possible given the current framework, and two, that is not advisable given the importance of free speech as per the constitution and in a democracy.
I see that is quite a interesting thing you just brought up in terms of the aspect about how this is implicitly changing, and I think it's quite relevant also in that sense, because if you look at it, the regulation is changing the way you're supposed to perceive social media in itself by sort of putting this obligation to make it like an editorial process where the intermediary is supposed to pass through everything and ensure everything is perfect in some senses, tends to change the nature of social media in itself as well as the way we're supposed to view it. And I think that's something the regulation is doing implicitly by shifting the way we look at intermediaries as well. I was just wondering if that would be accurate to state, and how would you view it? Do you feel the regulation changes certain perceptions in law?
Absolutely. So, for example, these the IT rules, they also bring within their ambit digital news organizations and OTT platforms. So to that extent, they massively changed the definition of what we considered an intermediary before these rules. There is also a legal challenge as to whether the IT Act gave the power to the executive to under the IT Act, the executive had the power to regulate OTT platforms and digital news organizations in the first place, given that they, in my opinion, do not fall under the definition of an intermediary as per the IT Act, right? So the IT Act says that an intermediary is an organization that hosts or transmits information, right? A digital news organization or an OTT platform is very different, given that they produce their own content. So I agree with you to the extent that the rules massively change the way we look at intermediaries, and there's also there's a massive question that courts need to answer is whether these rules had the power to expand the scope of intermediary the way that they have done.
Thank you so much, Raghav. So this is all that we had in terms of the content that we wanted to discuss with you, and this was very insightful. And so our final question is actually going to be, we would want to know your insight on, like, are there any red flags that you want to flag, like, Are there anything? Is there anything that you would want to discuss with us in terms of intermediary guidelines, considering you constantly engage with discourses about free speech all around the world? So, what would your be? What is your biggest concern with respect to these guidelines?
If I had to leave you with one thought about the rules, it is that these rules not just change the way we express ourselves online on social media platforms, they also change the way in which we consume news online. Because under the same broad stroke, they regulate digital news organizations. And they also change the way we express ourselves because they also include within their ambit OTT platforms. So, to anybody who is not as passionate about tech law as both of you, they need to care about the IT rules because this changes their entire persona online. This changes the way they express themselves in society. This changes the way they participate in the political process. This changes the way they receive information. This changes the way they process and express that information. This changes their participation in the democratic process in India. And therefore, I think these rules deserve our utmost attention at this point.
Thank you so much, Raghav. I think that's extremely insightful. So that's all we have for today. I really appreciate all of you tuning in for today's episode. If you wish to get in touch with us, feel free to email us at the email ID provided on our website. And we hope to see you all in the next episode of the Technology Law Podcast.